Hello and welcome to Grief Seeds, a podcast where you'll find insights, reframings, metaphors, and visualizations, all known as grief seeds, to help you cultivate growth and healing in your life after loss. My name is Shelby Forsythia. I'm an intuitive grief guide and author, and on this show, I'll share insights from my interactions with clients, wise words from fellow grievers, and personal stories from my own life, with the hope that they transform your grief as they have transformed mine. Because even when it doesn't feel like it, we are planting the seeds of growth in the midst of great pain and heartache. Your grief is welcome here. Hi there, grief growers, and thanks so much for joining me today. I have a question for you. Have you ever been told in your grief that you are too much, too loud, too sad, too indecisive, too mad, too distant? This is such a common occurrence for people in the aftermath of loss. So much so that we do it to ourselves. In the aftermath of my mother's death, I told myself that I was too broken, that I was too devastated, that I was too directionless, that I was too prone to being triggered, to be worth being around other people, including my friends and my family. I think this story of too much enters the picture for us when we're grieving, when we're trying to figure out what normal looks like in the aftermath of loss. And so we're using this old scale of measurement for emotions, for experiences that grief has just thrown right out the window. So we see ourselves in the mirror, or other people see us, and the verdict is too much. I was once working with someone in an online course that I hosted about a year ago, and she was relaying this story of her religious organization. And people would come up to her, or maybe not, and the sentiment was, because of your loss, because of the death of your child, you are too much. You are too sad. You are too overwhelming. You are too much of an activist. You are too far misaligned with our values and our community and our organization for us to welcome you, accept you, embrace you, see you with open arms. And let me acknowledge here the grief and the devastation in that, of being told you are too much by a place that you used to call home, and by a group of people to whom you used to belong. That is another grief event in and of itself, to be too much somewhere where you used to fit. And I offered her this reframe in the course. Came to me on the spot. I had never said this before that moment. And I said, what if in these people telling you that you are too much, they are letting you know that the container that they have created, whether it's in themselves or within a larger organization that they are a part of, is no longer enough to hold the expanse and the experience that is you? What if the story was not you are too much of something, but we are lacking in systems, in structures, in emotional intelligence to support you? So when your church says, you are too sad, we can't have you showing up to Bible study like this. Or when your book club says all you ever want to read are grief books and stories of pain and loss and heartache. Don't you ever want to read anything happy? Or when your friends tell you You're just too zoned out. We can't trust you to focus. Or when your workplace says, you are too tired, too unreliable. We don't know whether or not you're going to do a good job. Maybe what these spaces and these people are telling you is, we are no longer enough to support you. We don't have systems in place for grief. We are lacking. We are the ones with the deficit. We are the spaces and the people for whom something is wrong. We can no longer meet your needs and your criteria and your pain and your humanness and your grief. What if the story, grief goers, is not there is something so wrong with you, you have grown too large, and instead was the spaces that you used to fit are now too small because of grief. And there is more grief in this. Yes, there is grief in outgrowing spaces and people. And there is grief in that moment when they let you know that they are not enough by telling you you're too much. But then there is also grief in weighing the decision to leave. What now? If this space, if these people aren't enough for my grief, if they're telling me I'm too much, then where do I go? What do I do with all of this pain, with all of me, with all of my grieving self? And there is pain too when we tell ourselves that we are too much, when we try to make ourselves fit back in these boxes. What that story says is the old self that you used to know, the old identity that you used to live inside of, is no longer big enough, great enough, a large enough container to hold the version of you that now exists that is grieving. And so a new container, a new self must be formed. And you don't have to do this overnight. This is a whole other podcast episode. You do not have to create your new self after loss overnight, but know that there is more mourning to be had in grieving the person that you used to be. Because the person that you used to be thinks the person that you are now is too much. But for the person that you are now, your grieving self, this is your reality. This is not too much. It is simply true for you and real. So instead of buying into this belief that you are too much, too big, too loud, too sad, too overwhelmed, too unfocused, too unreliable, too stuck in the past, when you hear people say those things to you, or even when you say them to yourself, what I hope you'll reframe it as is, this space that I used to fit in, these people that I used to fit with, this self that I used to occupy, is no longer enough. I have outgrown it. It's time to look towards, or to look for, the next place, space, group of people, self, in which I can settle into and belong and comfortably, safely fit. I invite you to take a deep breath with me here. And out. May you know deeply, truly, wholly, that within the experience of your grief there is no such thing as too much. The ways in which your grief is expressing itself now in you and through you is exactly right. It is true for you. It is the reality that you're living in right now. So when you are faced with people, places, workplaces, organizations, religious institutions, and even that voice in your head that tell you you are too much. You need to scale it back. You need to calm down. You need to get back in line. Know that the message that is being sent in those phrases is we are no longer enough for you. We are the space, the place, the people, the organization that is lacking. My dear grief grower, there is nothing wrong with you for grieving. You are simply undergoing the natural and normal process of outgrowing spaces that no longer or maybe never had room for the very human experience of loss and grief. And that's okay. May you grieve this transition also. You are allowed to. It is another kind of loss to outgrow. And that's okay. And within this loss, may you see that there is something, a shred of something to be gained. The truth that there is another space, another group of people, another version of yourself that is waiting for you to arrive. There is a seat at a table that has been prepared especially for you in your grief. There is a corner of the world that is sized for just this version of you, for just this occasion, for just this heartbreak. And it is standing by to welcome you with open arms, the open arms that you deserve. And you do not have to earn by proving you can be small in your grief. There is somewhere that has a door open for you, a light on for you, a hot meal waiting for you. And this journey of finding that new space, of becoming that new person, of entering into this new friend group, is simply another part of grief. You are not alone. Deep breath in here and out. Thank you for joining me today. So that's all for this episode of Grief Seeds. Thank you so much for listening today. You can find additional grief support at shelbyforsythia.com or by following me on social media at shelbyforsythia on Facebook and Instagram. If this podcast helped you in your life after loss, please leave a review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And be sure to share Grief Seeds with a friend, because you never know what someone you love is going through. A huge thank you to my Patreon supporters for financially keeping this podcast on the air. If you'd like to support Grief Seeds on Patreon through a yearly or monthly pledge, you can do so at patreon.com/shelbyforsythia. My Patreon supporters get access to behind-the-scenes content, including a once-a-month grief support call with me and 5 90-minute workshops with topics decided by grievers themselves. Again, that website is patreon.com/shelbyforsythia. Music for Grief Seeds is performed by Addie Goldstein. As always, my dear grief growers, it was beautiful sharing this space and time with you today. I see you. I am so proud of you and the work that you're doing in the world, and I love you. Because even through grief, we are growing.